There is a moment in almost every relationship with an avoidant woman where you realize, without anyone saying out loud, that you are the one doing all the waiting. Not because she asked you to, not because there was ever a conversation about it. It just becomes the shape of things quietly, until one day you notice you've been standing in the same spot for months, checking your phone, reading her mood before you decide what to say, adjusting yourself around a closeness that was never guaranteed to arrive. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that happens, and why it is not about how much she loves you. I know this dynamic because I have studied it from the research side and heard it described almost word for word by people living inside it in real time. Once you understand the actual mechanism behind who controls a relationship like this, you stop mistaking her distance for a referendum on your worth. Here is what almost nobody explains clearly enough. In any relationship where one person is comfortable with closeness and the other is not, control does not go to the person who loves harder. It goes to the person who can leave the room emotionally without falling apart. That person decides the pace. That person decides how close is close enough. And the other person, the one who actually wants a relationship to work, ends up organizing their entire emotional life around someone else's tolerance for intimacy. This is not a flaw unique to any one woman you have dated. It is a structural feature of how closeness works when it is not mutual. Picture two people standing at the edge of water, both needing to step in for the relationship to actually exist. If only one person is willing to step forward freely, the other person's participation depends entirely on that first person's willingness. That is not a metaphor about effort. It is a description of what actually happens to the balance of power the moment desire for closeness becomes unequal.
The avoidant is in control of the relationship, and some of you who are on this end of the spectrum, you know how horrible this feels.
That is exactly the feeling most people cannot name until they hear someone else describe it. It is not weakness. It is a direct, predictable result of wanting something that someone else has the power to withhold. Here is where it gets more specific. An avoidant woman rarely experiences her own distance as control. From the inside, it does not feel like power. It feels like self-protection. Years of experience, usually starting long before you ever met her, taught her that closeness eventually asks for more than she can safely give without losing herself in the process. So she built a system, mostly unconscious, that regulates how much intimacy is allowed in at any given time. You are not being punished when she pulls back. You are running into a wall that existed before you arrived. The problem is that from where you are standing, none of that internal machinery is visible. All you see is the outcome, a message that takes 3 days to answer, a weekend where she needs space with no clear reason attached, a closeness that felt real last month suddenly replaced by a kind of politeness that makes you feel like a stranger in your own relationship. So you start doing what almost everyone in this position does. You start managing her availability the way you might manage a stock price, watching it, try and predict it, adjusting your own behavior in the hope that it will move in your favor. Let me describe how this actually plays out day to day, because most people recognize this the moment they hear it. You write a message, then delete it, then write a shorter version, because you are worried the first one asked for too much. You notice she has been active online without replying to you, and you tell yourself a story about why that is fine, even though some part of you does not believe the story. You start measuring your own worth in response times, and how long it takes her to say yes to plans, and whether she reaches out first or always waits for you to. None of this makes you needy. It makes you a person responding rationally to an irrational amount of power sitting on the other side of the relationship.
I want you to imagine that there's a kiddie pool in between us of water. To have a relationship, I have to, with my free will, step into that kiddie pool. And you have to step in too. I'm totally at the mercy of that.
That image captures something most explanations miss entirely. A relationship is not something one person can build alone by wanting it hard enough. It requires both people choosing to enter it, again and again, in small moments that rarely get noticed until one side stops showing up for them. When only one person is stepping forward, the entire structure tips toward whoever is still standing at the edge, deciding. Here is what most people get wrong about this dynamic, in one of two directions. Some assume the answer is to prove yourself more, to close the gap by giving more warmth, more patience, more reassurance, hoping that eventually she will feel safe enough to stop holding back. Others swing the opposite way. deciding the only answer is to withdraw completely, to match your coldness with coldness of their own, treating distance like a game that can be won by whoever cares less. Neither approach works, because both misread what is actually happening. This was never a contest of effort or indifference. It is a mismatch in how safe closeness feels to each person involved, and no amount of pushing or pulling changes that underlying safety calculation for her. Only she can change that from the inside, and usually only when she is ready to look directly at why closeness feels dangerous in the first place. What tends to happen instead, if nothing changes, is that the person doing all the waiting slowly disappears into the relationship, not physically. Emotionally, their own needs get smaller and smaller, because expressing them risks pushing her further away, until eventually they cannot remember what it felt like to want something from a relationship without first calculating the cost of asking for it.
So we basically sit here at the castle door that's mostly closed, waiting for you to open.
That image, more than almost any other, describes what it actually feels like to be the one who wants closeness in a relationship where someone else controls the door. You did not choose to be on that side of it. You ended up there because you were willing to love someone who was still learning whether love was safe. Here is the part that changes everything once you actually understand it. The door being closed most of the time is not a verdict on you. It is not proof that she does not care, and it is not proof that you're doing something wrong by wanting more. It is simply where she is, psychologically, right now, in a process that has very little to do with your effort, and almost everything to do with a nervous system that learned caution before it ever learned trust. Some avoidant women eventually do the internal work required to open that door more consistently. Many do not because they do not love the people standing outside it, but because the work required is harder than most people, including her, are ever honest about. So the real question is not whether she will eventually open the door. The real question is what you do while you're standing there, because that choice belongs entirely to you. There are two honest paths here, and neither one requires her to change first. The first path is recognizing that you cannot regulate someone else's capacity for closeness by managing your own behavior more carefully. You can only regulate your own life, your own standards, and how long you are willing to stand at a door that may or may not open on any timeline you can predict. That is not giving up on her. It is refusing to let your own sense of worth live entirely on the other side of a door you do not control. The second path is building a life solid enough that her eventual openness, if it comes, is something you welcome rather than something you have been surviving without. That means investing in your own friendships, your own goals, your own sense of stability, so that the relationship becomes one part of full life rather than the only door you are checking. People who do this are not colder toward the avoidant woman they love. They are simply no longer organizing their entire emotional state around a door someone else controls. Because the goal was never to force the door open faster. The goal was to become someone whose worth never depended on standing outside in the first place. So that whenever it does open, if it opens, you walk through as someone who is already whole, not someone who has been waiting their entire life to finally be let in.